In part 2 of this lecture, we're going to learn more about the different types of job performance that IO psychologists measure. One of the most important things an IO psychologist does is measure performance. The word performance involves action, behaviors. When we measure performance, we're measuring the behaviors that people use to do their jobs. High performers tend to use a specific set of behaviors, whereas low performers tend to use a different set of behaviors. IO psychologists try to figure out what those behaviors are so that they can be communicated to people to help them understand what is expected of them, but also so we can measure individuals' proficiency, the extent to which they perform all of the behaviors that are expected of them. What it means to perform well depends on the situation, on the organization and its goals. A manager at company A may perform different behaviors than a manager at company B because the two companies have different goals, they may be in different industries, different context, different expectations. When we perform our jobs, we create output, whether it's sales or content or some other criteria. When we measure these outcomes, we are evaluating job effectiveness. The output that we produce is not always under our complete control. There are external factors outside of ourselves that can impact the output we produce. IO psychologists might also compare the output to the input. Productivity is a ratio of effectiveness divided by the cost of that effectiveness. What was produced? What was the cost of production? Like many psychological constructs, job performance has been defined in many different ways. We're going to look at several different models of job performance. At the top of this model, we have 8 different types of job performance. 3 of those types are common to all jobs: job-specific task proficiency, personal discipline, and effort. In the middle row, we have 3 building blocks of job performance. In order to do our jobs, we need declarative knowledge, procedural knowledge, and motivation. Our abilities, our personality, our education helps us develop the knowledge that we need, and we can use different strategies to enhance our own motivation. Here is a table from the textbook that defines each of the 8 different types of performance. In addition to identifying different types of job performance, we can also think of it in terms of maximum and typical performance. Typical performance is what a person can do on average. On a typical day, what does that person's performance look like? Maximum performance is what a person can do when they're trying their best, when they're putting the most effort in. IO psychologists might also be interested in expert performance. What behaviors a person who has been doing the job for over 10 years uses. You might be familiar with the 10,000 hour rule that basically says people who have spent more than 10,000 hours practicing a skill are considered experts. Now imagine you're trying to improve performance across the organization. It might be helpful to measure all 3 of these types, typical, maximum, and expert. You can then help people who are performing at the typical level move to the expert level through career development. IO psychologists also find it useful to differentiate between task performance and contextual performance. Task performance is how well job incumbents perform the tasks, the activities, the duties of the job. And of course, these requirements vary from job to job. When this type of performance is important, we might use cognitive ability tests, knowledge tests, or work samples. Years after IO psychologists began studying task performance, some of them noted that there was a portion of the job that was not being measured by the traditional tools. The relational component, the social component. Contextual performance includes the behaviors that employees use to manage relationships with their colleagues, their supervisors, and other stakeholders in the organization. In most organizations, contextual performance is not part of the job description. It's not explicitly required. Personality tests are one of the best predictors for this type of performance. Organizational citizenship behaviors, OCBs, are another type of performance. These are the voluntary behaviors that people use to go above and beyond what is expected in their job. The example I like to use is when I leave a classroom, I turn the lights off. No one asks me to do that. It's not a requirement of my job, but I know that if I do it, I'm helping the university save money and doing a very small part to help protect the environment. We can divide OCBs into two main categories. Altruistic OCBs help individual people within the organization, whereas generalized compliant OCBs are focused more on the organization. Most of the time, we focus on the behaviors that we want people to demonstrate, desirable behaviors. But what about all the things we don't want people to do? How do we measure those behaviors? Counterproductive work behaviors are the voluntary behaviors that violate norms, policies, traditions, procedures, and make it more difficult for the job incumbent and their colleagues to do their job. CWBs are the dark side of job performance. In this hierarchy, we have a few examples. One category of CWBs is called interpersonal deviance and includes things like gossiping and fighting in the office. The other category is called organizational deviance. Things like stealing property, sabotaging business operations, or showing up late, leaving early, taking long breaks. As you can imagine, an employee who continuously uses counterproductive work behaviors isn't going to live up to their full potential. When a lot of people in an organization are relying on counterproductive work behaviors, the organization is not reaching its full potential. Because counterproductive work behaviors are something that we don't often think about, I want to spend just a few minutes discussing some of the antecedents of these behaviors, some of the causes of these behaviors, as well as a few strategies for preventing them. What causes counterproductive work behaviors? A whole host of things. Situational constraints, like not giving employees control over how their work gets done. Feelings of injustice, low job satisfaction, feeling alienated from one's coworkers or supervisors. Strong individual needs. Some people have low self-control. Some personalities are more prone to counterproductive work behaviors, including aggressive personalities. To prevent counterproductive work behaviors, we need several different systems working together. The selection and training systems have a role to play in choosing people who avoid counterproductive work behaviors and training people to avoid counterproductive work behaviors. Punishing these behaviors requiring employees to apologize when they exhibit CWBs, making sure that leaders, supervisors, and other decision makers follow the norms, policies, and procedures of the organization, using humor to change people's attitudes about the acceptability of these behaviors, and finally, helping people manage their stress. CWBs tend to be more common in organizations where things are not going well. One of the most recent developments in job performance is the concept of adaptive performance. If you think about all the types we've covered so far in this lecture, none of them capture adaptability, flexibility, the willingness to change, learn, and grow. Adaptive performance includes the behaviors that people use to adapt to the changing circumstances of their job. This type of performance is not applicable to all jobs. Some jobs require more change than others. Change due to advances in technology, mergers and acquisitions, downsizing, restructuring, globalization. When job incumbents are expected to be flexible to adapt to the situation, it's important that IO psychologists measure adaptive performance.